And really what we use today for is just question and answer, usually on coronavirus related stuff. I have a couple updates there, yes.
Mhm.
So as some of you may already know, the PPP funds ran out last Friday or end of day Thursday, depending on who you talk to. The expectation is some additional funding is going to be approved this week for both the PPP and the disaster loan. So that's the current expectation. There'll be some additional funding. Wall Street Journal has reported on this, a few other places as well, saying that things are close. The SBA came out and said that you can apply and get basically approval pending additional funding. So if you haven't applied, make sure you get your application in. Otherwise, if you did apply with another bank or with a bank like a large national bank, I would suggest you also apply with a regional bank as well. I had a friend who applied at B of A, didn't hear back, followed up a bunch, and then applied on Friday, this last Friday, with a regional bank in Nebraska, and they got back to him in 15 minutes. Unfortunately, what they got back to him is we ran your application and you're rejected and we're not sure why. And then a few hours later, it became apparent why. But the point being, like this regional bank, in this case in Nebraska, and we've shared out Continental Bank of Utah and some other places, they're not necessarily getting very many applications. So potentially you could get an answer in minutes rather than waiting weeks and weeks.
Cool. And that it may seem counterintuitive at first that a smaller local bank could get there faster, but it's just I imagine the Bank of America's and the Chases and all of those are running into prioritization issues, right? Just the mass volume of people coming in.
Yeah, we talked about this over the weekend because as I continue to do, throw stones at other CPAs and, well, mostly non-accountants who are offering accounting service, not credentialed accountants offering accounting services. And they were upset that some of their clients didn't get approved. Of course, they had charged for this application, so that's probably why they're mostly upset, given the client probably wants money back. But they were particularly upset that banks were biasing customers who had larger deposits as well as outstanding debt, and that they heard from some bankers that they funded clients that had outstanding debt because they were worried that if they didn't fund them, they were going to default on their loan. And we've been saying that for weeks, that don't be surprised that the banks are going to preference clients who have outstanding debt because they're on the hook for those funds. They use their depository base to lend. And so, of course, they'd like to get money from the SBA, so not directly from their depository base, to lend to these clients who are potentially insolvent to help them weather the storm so that they can continue to pay their debt. So not surprising that was the case. So you should assume that a profit-oriented business would take profit-oriented actions. They're acting consistent with their fiduciary responsibility to maximize shareholder value. It's potentially they'd be more open to lawsuits from their shareholders for violating their fiduciary responsibility if they didn't. So always surprised when people are shocked. I'm always surprised when someone else is surprised that a corporation with publicly traded corporation is going to bias towards profit motive, and that's just what they do. It's their responsibility. So, but to come full circle on that, B of A, Bank of Nebraska may have 3 people in their SBA department, but if they get 12 applications, that's 4 per person, whereas Bank of America might have 1,000 people in their SBA group, but if they get 500,000 applications, the ratio is just much different. So on the surface, it may seem counterintuitive, but on a ratio basis, number of applications to staff has often been much lower for the regional banks.
Yeah, and I think it's one of the reasons I brought that up is that I think that perspective is important. I've had quite a few people in doom. I get it, chaos, doom, and gloom. We call it the doom loop ever since you sent me that article about how smart people learn.
Yeah.
I think it's important to sometimes have these conversations and reframe the perspective because there are some people that feel uh, it's accelerating the doom loop when they feel like, oh well, because I'm small, the banks don't care about me, and then they're acting helpless. And I think it's a good perspective to understand that it's actually probably the most appropriate thing to do, and that's okay. Just apply somewhere where you might have better odds. A bunch
Yeah.
of people are paralyzed saying, well, because I'm small and because I don't have debt, I'm getting punished. And the reality is, to me, it just seems like prioritization. When you have an overwhelming number of things to do, you have to prioritize.
Mm-hmm.
And it makes sense to prioritize in a way that is most aligned with your long-term mission.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. So it may not feel fair. Why when I did everything right? I don't carry a lot of debt in my not getting access to these funds. And yeah, that may seem unfair, and the game is a little bit rigged against you in that case. And so then the most appropriate thing to do in that situation is to look for opportunities where the interests are more mutually aligned. So these regional banks who are hungry for business and who typically lose out to the big national banks. They're hungry to take this stuff on. What questions do people have? If not, we don't need to extend this out too much.
Yeah. Any questions? We got a small one. I expect Mondays are, judging by my internet speed, right around this time from like 8 to noon Pacific. The whole world is just trying to get caught up right now. So, totally, yeah, best to utilize the time in a way other than sitting here listening to us talk if we can answer questions. Put it on your calendar. Wednesday, Ray Care Cash is coming on. He is a brilliant guy. You've probably seen him on TV a bunch of times. He's behind some massive corporations. His job is to make sure that things actually get done. So he's the enforcer in some really big companies. Again, Friday, we have Jason Redman. He wrote the book Overcome. He was shot 7 times in Afghanistan, Purple Heart guy. And both of them have, funny enough, I've been in conversation with both of them, just jamming. Both of them have decision-making criteria. And I think everybody that's been in the cash flow engineering and been around is going to be shocked at how similar and aligned, because they've never been through our stuff. They don't know Dan yet. And you're going to be shocked at how these people have developed through life experience very similar lenses and decision-making parameters. So I'm super excited about that. And then Monday, we have Dr. Gabby Lyon. She is doctor to celebrities. So before the COVID thing, she was on a wait list. 3 months booked out, $1,000 an hour to come in and pay her cash into her physical office in New York. So people are flying in from all around the world, and now she's working with them remotely. Very similar to Dr. Bruce, but less about sleep, more about performance. Very similar. She's actually really good friends with Jeff Spencer, who we had on, and she has some great stuff for just keeping on schedule, optimizing your performance throughout this. Little tips and tricks, things to do at home, keep your team productive, all that stuff. So that's next Wednesday. That's this Wednesday, Friday, and then next Monday. Make sure it's on your calendar. All the guests we've had have given us immediately actionable things that have been beneficial to me anyway.
For sure. Yeah, same.
Cool.
I don't see any other questions. Nick, anything you want to talk about?
Not in particular, outside of it's kind of an ask. It's a very, very soft ask, but we get a lot of positive feedback and we appreciate that. We love that. Maybe an encouragement. Don't be afraid to share anything you see, invite people in. We benefit tremendously now that we've closed off these calls from what's called collective momentum. Add 1 or 2 people in here and they may ask the question that I'm late. Is Dan moving or just putting up new pictures? New pictures.
Well, what was up on my wall before all the sheets were all the sticky notes from my book. That manuscript is through basically draft one, so I don't need that stuff up on my wall anymore. So trying to improve ripped all that stuff down and trying to improve the aesthetic. So I went and grabbed favorite artwork that I have from other areas in the office, because I'm the only one in the office, and decided to move it in here and spruce up my space. But awesome. I may be moving offices, so this is a little bit in the weeds, but I live in West Seattle, which is west of downtown. Pretty creative naming process. And there's a bridge that goes from West Seattle to connect with I-5 and another highway to get downtown, or really to get just about anywhere. Well, a few weeks ago that they closed the bridge, and apparently best case it's going to reopen in 2 years, maybe longer than that.
Doesn't that take your drive from like 10 minutes to like 45 or something crazy?
So when everything was shut down, when like this initial kind of coronavirus stuff went into place and traffic went down quite a bit, my commute was from my house to the office, like to my desk, was 16 minutes. And now without the bridge, just like having to go down and around basically to connect to the highway, it's more like a half hour. So twice as long without traffic. With traffic, it might be like 2 hours each way. So maybe a satellite office in West Seattle coming soon, long story long.
All right, real quick, we'll rattle off questions because they're coming in. Done there. What would help me is a better understanding of where these webinars fall into your various programs. I'll take a stab at that, because there's a lot of language stuff like webinars versus meetings versus live calls. They are separate programs serving separate needs. So cash flow engineering is simply a course that shows Dan's methodology for cash flow engineering. What we could do, I'll give you some big picture perspective, because this is actually common for people that don't play on the internet often or haven't built a lot of digital stuff. One option was Dan and I could build stuff like in the dungeon and then give it to you. What we've chosen to do is build stuff live so that there's some reinvention, so that there's Q&A. So I wouldn't look at it as how do these webinars fit in, as much as we're just having these conversations and building stuff and allowing our platinum members to have access so that they can get clarity on certain things, if that makes sense. Cash flow engineering is re-engineering your cash flow. And the revenue multiplier, again, another way to think about it is we could have written a book or filmed all these videos, in a studio somewhere, and then released them and said, here's how you add streams of revenue. What we decided to do, what we prefer to do, is have some live interaction. There's a little bit of accountability. There's a little bit of momentum. And this kind of conversation is where I think Dan and I both do best. So it may help to think about it that way. They're just essentially separate courses that solve separate problems. Not everybody, it also gets confusing for early adopters that we grandfather in, because you have access to everything. Not everybody does. Somebody might come in and just buy cash flow engineering. They're not invited to this. They have, they're not invited to office hours and revenue multiplier. So I would think of them as different products that solve different problems. The only difference is, unlike most, we've biased, a lot of people build products to remove the communication, right? The two-way communication. We've kind of biased maintaining it as much as possible. So
maybe just to summarize too. So we have cash flow engineering on Tuesdays. There's some people who just bought that product and we've developed that program previously, and we continue to refine it. So our Tuesday calls aren't necessarily hard teaching the program. All of that is recorded in a membership site. It's really answering people's questions and then new distinguishments. So how do we apply it? So last week we applied it to how do we start to restart our business, and what are the things we should be thinking through. So Tuesdays is really answering people's questions and applying the methodology specifically to cash flow engineering. So some people have just bought that program. Some people have just bought our newest program, revenue engineering. Now, originally we were going to talk about totally different topics, but then it was sort of in our queue, because every quarter, basically, we're teaching something new and documenting it as we teach it live. And so some people are just buying into the revenue engineering program. And then there are folks who bought the platinum package, which is they just get access to everything. So all these calls.
Yeah. So again, perspective, because I'm only over explaining this because there may be a number of people on this call or watch this recording that are thinking about going digital. So it just things to think about. You could buy cash flow engineering as a standalone course right now, and you would just get all the recordings, no access. You can also upgrade to get some access, Q&A, and support. So they're all standalone. I know you have a lot of pay to play. I get confused as to where I am in the pipeline, meaning what I'm signed up for. The easiest way is if you go into the member area, which by design, we have not made people log into the member area. We email you the logins because we want as much engagement as possible. If there were 1,000 people on here, we would probably make you jump through some hoops, right? Like, hey, go to the member area, find the link, fill out your questions, come back in, just to maintain the usefulness, the utility of these calls. So if you don't know what you're signed up for, you could drop into the member area, cfeclass.com/login, if I remember correctly. And whatever you see is what you are signed up for. Everything else is invisible to you. And Dan, you in particular, I believe you are a private client of Dan's, which makes you kind of grandfathered in as a platinum member. So you just get everything.
Yeah,
the reason being
cfeclass.com/login. That's how you get to the member site.
Yeah. So the reason being, my private clients have the same thing. Kind of have access to everything. It's not necessarily your responsibility to know where you are in the quote unquote pipeline, because as a private client, you can just say, hey, what do I need to focus on next? And we can redirect you appropriately. That's how I look at it. So it's less about trying to keep up with what you have and what you don't have, and more about, hey, what problem do I need to solve right now? And then us making sure that you have access to the tools to solve that particular problem.
Yeah.
So it's a little blurry, and we knew it. We've talked about it internally. When you come in at the ground level and we grandfather you up, it can get blurry because you didn't go through the whole sales pipeline and messaging for each individual thing. You just kind of got access to stuff. So
I think the other confusing thing for folks too is that there's a broader strategy at play in terms of what are we really building towards. And so we're just building towards teaching programs and doing Q&A. Like, no, I mean, it's the strategy that's part of the broader strategy, which is what we're teaching in the revenue engineering class.
Yep. I was going to say, if only somebody would teach that.
If only there was a methodology where you could systematically add more revenue and have it point to like the broader end goal. Well, that is what we're going through currently. And we're going through it currently because it was a forcing function for us to document it, that there's some time savings, both between the way that Nick and I collaborate so that we're both using the same language, but also between my partner, Nolan, in terms of how we are communicating about opportunities. When there's not a shared language, it just takes longer because we're not viewing things through the same frame. We're talking about things in the same way. So that we check 2 boxes in our qualitative lenses, which we teach in the cash flow engineering. And then we also, it's also revenue generating. So we check another box. So three out of the 4 boxes are checked. There's not necessarily an expense reduction per se. Maybe arguably there's some efficiency that we gain, but less data to support that. So it's part of a broader strategy of what we're building towards. And if you want to,
and the way it's built,
okay.
One, because I think it's better for goodwill. I think it's better for brand. I think it's better for long game. Two, it's actually easier on our end. It's simpler. Is if you get in the ground floor, we always give opportunities to, hey, you want to get in on platinum? Hey, you want to get in on this? Which means you just get introduced to stuff that other people don't have. So the assumption sometimes is that, in Dan Austin, in your case in particular, because obviously we know you really well, the assumption is that everybody else sees what you see. And as the later they come into the process, they're going to see different stuff as it gets sorted out. So like I said, cash flow engineering, you just buy the course and you just get access to the course, and you'd have no idea these live calls were going on until we hit you with some sort of messaging and invited you in or tried to sell you on it or whatever. Mm-hmm. So there's that, but I'm glad Dan said something, because I didn't want to bring it up until it was appropriate. Big picture play here, which Dan took down all the sticky notes, so we can't try to read them and figure out what it is. But the really cool thing about being part of this is if you're in the cash flow engineering and the revenue, or the cash flow, the revenue multiplier, sorry, you're going to see how this comes together and how we built it in a way to hedge the downside. So basically we're reinventing, we're also generating revenue and building stuff all at the same time, versus like Dan and I getting together and building it like in the corner or, in the basement or something, and then crossing our fingers and hoping we could sell it. So it's a hedging the downside by using Dan's four lenses. It's just one giant process of ongoing that.
Yeah, the underpinning of all of that goes back to hedging the downside, as you said, Nick. I think it's easy to conflate this idea of being a visionary with just straight up gambling. Mm-hmm. And we often say, I don't like doing operations. That's not really my thing. I had someone else to do that. Really, I'm a visionary. And that's become this like thing in entrepreneurial land that I've noticed over the last couple of years in particular. Maybe it's more of an internet marketing thing in particular, but it's sort of like, are you visionary or are you operations? And it's like, you gotta choose one. And to a degree, there's some truth to that there's personalities that are more visionary than operational and vice versa. But it's easy to just go, well, I've got all these great ideas, and so I'm more of a visionary. And so then each idea that I have, I've built the framework, the confirmation bias to go like, I should explore these things because I'm a visionary and that's what I do. And that's the position that I'm in. And there's some truth to that, but when does being a visionary and those ideas move over to just your gambling? And in other words, the house is more likely to win than you. And we want to avoid that. We want to rig the game. We don't want the house to be more likely to win than us. We want to put ourselves in a position where we're okay with every possible outcome. One of those outcomes is that it's a forcing function, and so it creates the content that I needed to create anyways. And so that's the worst case scenario, is it doesn't generate revenue like we thought it would, or doesn't save us on expenses, but it still finished this thing that we were going to do regardless. So it's a dangerous game to always be in the ideation stage and saying, well, that's because I'm a visionary, and exploring all these ideas and going and building all of this stuff that never materializes. I've done it before. Years ago, I built this whole small business tax and accounting course because I found that 80% of the questions that I was getting from startup clients were the same questions. So I thought, well, just build this into a course and got it professionally recorded and all these slides, and nobody wanted it. Nobody. We sold a couple $1,000s worth.
It's really well done. I've seen it.
Yeah,
Really well done.
A ton of time put into it, but nobody wanted it because they wanted the feel of someone answering their questions. They don't actually want to learn necessarily tax and accounting stuff. They want to feel like it's customized, which is a good learning point, and it pivoted the way that we did some of our messaging in our CPA firm. But I don't want to repeat that sin repeatedly, where I have this idea and I do a bunch of research that's really just confirmation bias anyways, and then launch some product and then it be crickets. So how do we systematically ensure that we're okay with any possible outcome, which goes back to the 4 lenses, but also systematically working through all of the downside risks. And not to keep pointing things back to Thursday, but we have the case framework in the CFE: compile, assess, strategize, execute. It's the same framework in the revenue multiplier, which is we're going to compile, assess, strategize, and execute. And so how do we go about compiling all of our opportunities that are out there, and compile the sources of income that we have right now? Are they properly earmarked? We talked about on our last Thursday class how folks tend to have all of their revenue going into one bucket from all these different sources, and then it's so commingled that the net output gets diluted. So we'll show you how to actually compile your different revenue sources in a way that you can see where you're at on the revenue pyramid, and then you can take your opportunities that you have through existing champions that you have, and their network to determine where you should explore further to fill in your revenue pyramid while systematically kind of eliminating downside risk. So that's the next class, but it all comes back to a consistent methodology.